this Warframe guide, I'm gonna show you the top 10 primary weapons that you gotta start using right now to melt absolutely every content in the game. We're gonna talk about how they work, where you can get them for yourself, and of course, I have builds. Big shout out to all our generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, except this one, DE please fix. And now, let's jump right into it. And because it is a top 10 list, we first have to go over a little disclaimer so that we're all on the same page. Just like every top 10 list, also this one of course includes personal preference. But just because I like these 10 weapons does not mean that every other weapon is objectively bad, and if you like something else, that is completely fine too. Pretty much everything in the game is viable. In fact, if you want to share your favorite weapons, then let us know in the comments down below, maybe for a potential follow-up video. Up next, of course, I'm gonna show builds in this video, but since Warframe has so many different game modes and enemy factions and situations, one build will never fit every single need. So whichever mod setups you see in this video, treat them as an inspiration, not as objective statements. Furthermore, for many of them, I already have dedicated videos over on my channel, so if there's anything that specifically resonates with you and you want to know all the nitty-gritty details, then feel free to also check out the dedicated guide on it. And lastly, as long as I don't state specifically otherwise, every weapon in this video is on the list for its own performance and I didn't build into specific niche synergies. But now, let's finally get going. You're gonna get mad at me anyway. The first spot on today's list is actually a double pack, and that would be the Fenmore and the Burst on Prime Incarnon. See, we all know that Incarnon weapons are probably the overall strongest weapon type in the game, but I didn't want to spam them all over today's list, which is why I came up with the rule that for every limited time Incarnon weapon where the adapter is not always available, I will give an alternative weapon that fills the same role with similar strength that is constantly available. And with the Burst on Prime Incarnon being probably the best fully automatic assault rifle in the game, the always available alternative would be the Fenmore, which is also an Incarnon weapon, but one of the OG Incarnons, meaning you can always acquire it from Caballero on the Zeraman 10-0. The role that these two weapons fill is pretty much the same: fully automatic assault rifle. The Fenmore at base is semi-automatic and then turns into a type of LMG, whereas the Burst on is a burst rifle and then gets fully automatic once you transform it. Now, both of these rifles are incredibly strong and deal tons of damage. In my personal opinion though, the Burst on is a little bit better because it has a bit of AoE on bullet impact, which the Fenmore doesn't, and where the Fenmore needs to be purposely built into not doing crits, we're gonna get into that in a second, the Burst on Prime Incarnon thrives on big red crit numbers, which is preferable against most types of enemies that have damage attenuation, which is why I think the Burst on is the best fully automatic assault rifle, with the Fenmore coming in at a close second. Let's now though start with the evolutions, and why don't we drop in with the Fenmore? It's an original Incarnon, meaning it has 5 evolutions, not 4. First one's just activating the Incarnon mode. The second one might be a little bit contentious. I went for more accuracy and recoil reduction. Most players would probably like fire rate, and that is perfectly viable, but I think the Fenmore is not the most precise weapon, so I think you get more damage downrange with more precision. What we have right here, I go for more magazine capacity. You could do whatever you like. In the fourth one, you definitely want to go for more status chance and less crit chance, because in the fifth one, there is basically just one objective right thing to do, and that is you have a 50% chance to get 2000% damage on non-critical hits, which is why right here we reduce our crit chance even further to make that happen as frequently as we can. Just a quick side note, these 2000% is not base damage, it is multiplicative to base damage, so you're dealing ridiculous numbers. That's also one of the reasons why the Fenmore is so strong. I know I went over these evolutions pretty darn quickly, but we have 10 weapons to talk about, and I have a dedicated Fenmore guide as well, so if you want to have all the nitty-gritty details and discussions on different situations and cases, you might want to check that out later. Let's now though talk about the Burst on and its evolutions. In the first one, I went for the one with the base armor. Then in the second one, I went for less recoil, making this thing pinpoint accurate. The other two, though, are viable if you wanted to use them. And then the last one, that's the one that is most important. I went for full crit by increasing the base crit chance by 22%. This one, in my opinion, is not all that great. And this one right here is specifically only if you don't want to even use the Incarnon mode and keep it as a burst rifle. Then this might be a thing. I go with the crit though. That is what makes the burst on really, really strong. As for the builds, I have one example build prepared. Again, if you want to see more variety, I have a dedicated video on that. This right here is a pure corrosive flat damage build against Grineer, benefiting off these crazy damage bonuses that the Fenmore gets. Feel free to adjust this build to your personal needs, of course. As for the burst on Prime Incarnon, here we have a similar anti-Grineer corrosive focused build. Also here, there are a lot more build options that you could go for. Check out my full burst on Prime Incarnon video if you want to see a detailed discussion on all of those. Up next, we have a relatively new weapon in the form of the Coda Base Assist, which is a real banger. This shotgun fires huge projectiles dealing tons of damage, and it also has a secondary fire where it shoots out mites at enemies that will deal damage over time and inflict various status effects. Plus, there's a unique trait that makes it that when an enemy is open for a finisher, then you can use the secondary fire at that enemy to instantly teleport over them, perform this finisher, which will then give you a huge buff of plus 100% damage and plus 100% multi-shot. All in all, the Coda Base Assist is somewhat comparable to the Tenant Arca Plasmor. However, in my personal opinion, the Base Assist is just the superior version, not only because of this buff, but also because it has bigger numbers. And the greatest point of them all is that Galvanized Savvy is multiplicative to base damage sources on direct hit. So yeah, you're gonna deal a ton of damage with this thing. If you want to get it for yourself, then of course you need to have Warframe 1999 unlocked because it is a Coda Lich weapon, so you gotta farm your Lich, get the live heart cells, and then wait for a good offer in Alionor's store to snipe a copy of it for yourself. What we have right here, again, an example build corrosive against Grineer. This one is meant to deal as much flat damage as possible. As you can also see here, it's big numbers, it's big elemental mods, not that much status. With the Coda Base Assist, however you want to call it, there is a crazy variety of how you could build it. I myself haven't made a full video on it yet, but I know WarframeFlo has, and I really liked his. So if you want to know all the details about this weapon, make sure to check that out. Now, up next, we're going to talk about one of the, maybe even the, most broken weapon in the game, and it's also the only gun on today's list that only made it here for a few specific interactions. I'm talking about the Kuva Sobek. First of all, being a Kuva weapon, of course you get it from a Kuva Lich. If you need a guide on Kuva Liches, I already have one out. And at first glance, this shotgun is really nothing special. It's just a normal semi-automatic shotgun. However, what makes this thing so incredibly strong is its special augment mod called Acid Shells, which makes it that whenever you take out an enemy with the Kuva Sobek, then this enemy will explode. In addition to that, this enemy will also deal 45% of its maximum health as damage to all the enemies in that 15-meter radius. This is incredibly strong because based on maximum health, that means it first scales really well with enemy level, but also it is outright broken when combined with 4 specific skills: Zata's Whisper from Zaku, Toxic Lash from Seren, Resupply from Side09, and whatever the name of Oraxia's 4 is. The reason why this is so incredibly broken on the Sobek is that when the enemy explodes and hits everybody around them, that is still considered weapon damage, meaning every enemy hit will also be hit with that imaginary second bullet from the skill, which, if built right, deals so much damage that you just nuke away the entire room. When we're talking about the builds with the Kuva Sobek, then things look a little bit interesting here for me because I do in fact have a Riven, which is pretty beefy. It gives me innate viral plus damage to Grineer, If you don't have a Riven, then replace this with anything else that increases your DPS. What we're looking into here is, of course, going for acid shells. This is the only reason we even play this weapon in the first place. Clip delegation, another very, very good Sobek augment. The rest here is pretty self-explanatory. I should say, though, that this specific build is meant to go hand in hand with Saren, and that I run this loadout that gives me external crit chance buffs, which is why I only mod Primed Ravage here for crit damage. No crit chance on this build. If you were to run a Saren that doesn't give you crit chance on the weapon, then you might switch something back and forth. But basically, this one right here evaporates entire rooms. The next weapon is another shotgun, and one that was recently featured on the channel with its own build guide, and that would be the Phantasma. This beam-firing shotgun is absolutely amazing because it is a status beast. It, without exaggeration, can inflict hundreds of damage over time effects on an enemy in just a second. It is crazy. And not only for single targets, but it also has infinite body punch through, so you can melt whole groups like this, and I just absolutely love it. One special thing to mention with the Phantasma, though, is that there is a bit of a debate to be had whether the Prime or the normal one is the best, because the stat increases that the Prime gets over the normal one aren't all that important for most players out there. If you want to apply external crit buffs to your Phantasma, then go for the Prime because it has higher crit damage. However, if you have or want to go for a Phantasma Riven, then maybe go for the normal one instead, as this has a higher Riven disposition than the Prime. Oh yeah, and if you want to get it for yourself, then the Prime, obviously, comes from the corresponding relics, whereas the normal one, you can just buy the blueprint in the market, build it in your foundry, and that's it. Now, when looking at builds for the Phantasma, then I should say I personally went with the Prime variant over the normal one because I don't own a Riven and I have a setup that gives me external crit chance, meaning I can actually go for crit. That's why I use the Prime personally. I have two very, very similar builds right here, one going for heat damage over time, one going for electricity damage over time. This one right here might be my favorite because electricity is more front-loaded than heat in its DOT. Of course, we go for as much status chance as humanly possible. That's what the Phantasma excels at, and the rest is again pretty self-explanatory. Up next, we have another double pack of one Incarnon weapon and its non-Incarnon counterpart, which would be the group clearing masters, Torrid Incarnon, as well as the Tenet Galaxion. Both of these weapons are beam weapons that have great AoE capabilities. Whenever you hit an enemy with them, you create a beam chain that links over to nearby enemies, damaging all of them at once. Only difference here is that the Torrid Incarnon has a little bit of an invisible AoE at wherever the beam hits a target, and all the enemies within that AoE also spawn their own beam chains, making the turret technically a bit better in terms of AoE. However, for the Tenet Galaxion, there's also a very nice feature, and that is if you give it punch through, then also here, this can lead to you spawning more beam chains by hitting multiple enemies at once. Now, let's take a quick look at the evolutions for the Torrid Incarnon. The second one is a very straightforward one. One gives you 31 more base damage, one gives you 51 more base damage, so we're gonna go with this one right here. This one right here doesn't really matter all too much because it doesn't affect the Incarnon mode, which is what we're going for. And then for the last one, it comes down to how you build the weapon. If you want to do flat upfront damage, you want to have more crit chance. If you want to have a maybe hybrid type of build, you go for more crit and more status chance. And if you want to have a purely status focused build, then you would go with the maximum 34% extra status chance. As for the Torrid build, this right here is a little bit of a weird example maybe. I go for more direct damage, not so much into status chance, and I also added Prime Cryo rounds because it's a whole lot of elemental damage on top. What we don't do here is we don't go for Galvanized Aptitude because the extra damage of Galvanized Aptitude only works on the direct hit enemies and not on those enemies who are in the AoE, which I extend by Prime Firestorm. But of course, there are tons of different build options for the Torrid Incarnon 2. Check out my Torrid Incarnon video if you want to have a detailed discussion on all the options that you have. As for the build on the Tenet Galaxion, this one is a bit more particular. I would highly recommend getting a Tenet Galaxian with an electricity progenitor because that is a great damage over time effect. Alternatively, you could also go for heat if you just prefer that over electricity. What you want to do in the build though is definitely use Malignant Force, as that will combine with the innate cold damage into viral, so that whichever progenitor DOT element you will have that separately. That is very important. And because of the fact that my Tenet Galaxian only has a measly 25% progenitor element amount, the damage that you're going to see in the showcase is a bit lower than what you would ideally want to have. And in mission, I really like the Tenet Galaxian. I probably prefer the Torrid, but this one is a great alternative. The next one on today's list is one of my all-time favorite shotguns in the game, and that would be the Cedo Prime. See, the Cedo is a fan favorite. At base, it's a fully automatic shotgun dealing decent damage. However, it also has a very powerful secondary fire, where it shoots out a glaive that bounces between enemies and applies the 4 base elements, toxin, electricity, cold, and heat to them, making it a great status primer. But, as if that's not enough, also the primary fire has a special feature where it deals more damage against the enemies based on how many status effects are applied to them. Basically, it's a weaker version of Condition Overload, and in combination with the alt fire, this makes the Cedo incredibly strong. For the Cedo Prime, it's kind of similar to many other weapons on today's list. There is a huge build variety that you could have, and if you want to have an in-detail discussion on that, check out my Cedo Prime video. What I'm going to showcase you right here is a factionless build, meaning this is not tailored towards any specific faction. You can just use it vanilla against everything. And what I'm focusing here on is a lot of just damage and different elements that I combine with Galvanized Savvy, as this gives us more direct damage per status type. The more status types we have, the better. And remember, from the alt fire disc, you're gonna get the 4 base elements on top of that, and you have the unique trait that gives you even more damage per status type, so that is pretty self-explanatory. In the Arcane, you could go just for more base damage, but I decided to go for Primary Blight that gives me more crit damage and even more multi-shot on toxin status effects. In general, if you wanted to build this weapon against a specific enemy faction, then I would probably eliminate Magnetic Strafe and replace it with a faction mod, and overall, you're gonna have a lot of fun with this build. The next weapon on today's list is something that you probably didn't expect, but it is actually a hidden gem. I'm talking about the AX52. First of all, if you want to get it for yourself, then you need to be rank 4 with the Hex in Helvania, talk to Amir, and then you can buy it from him. At first glance, this is a pretty straightforward weapon, fully automatic assault rifle, but it has 2 special unique features, that being if you hip fire it, you have plus 60% ammo efficiency, but the real kicker is, if you're aiming, then headshots have a plus 400% crit chance. This is not a flat bonus like Harrow, unfortunately, it works like a mod, but 400% is still very, very strong. That's basically 2 times critical delay. However, even though that is already pretty nice, and I made a video on it last year when it first released, the AX52 got even stronger, and it is honestly ridiculous. With the special Nightwave augment Biotic rounds, which I highly recommend, you get plus 150% viral and plus 150% magnetic damage for 15 seconds whenever you get a weak point kill. Now, to be 100% fair, the AX52 is not necessarily an AoE weapon with which you can clear waves and waves of enemies, right? This is a precision tool to take out big, strong single targets, like for example demo units in Disruption, Thrax enemies in Void Cascade, Acolytes, Kuva Liches, you do you. Against those big chunky enemies, it is absolutely ridiculous. Let's now look at the build for the AX52, and also here I'm gonna show one specific build only. Again, there are multiple build options, I have a dedicated video on that, yada yada yada, but this build right here is specifically what you want to use for your Disruption mission, for your single high value targets, what we talked about earlier. We're gonna go for a dedicated headshot focused thing with primary acuity in combination with galvanized scope, so you really gotta zoom in, you gotta nail those headshots, then it's gonna be very strong. Faction mod, of course, you're gonna switch that out for whatever you're going up against. And the only thing that this build right here is lacking is a fire rate, so ideally you want to play this with a Warframe or an Arcane externally that gives you fire rate. That will then massively increase your damage per second. Let's though up next go a little bit old school by talking about a bow, namely the Proboscis Cernos. This thing is absolutely amazing, and in case you don't have it for yourself, then you can just get the blueprint from the market and craft it. Although I should say, one of the crafting ingredients is the Mutalis Cernos, which in turn you only get from the infested lab in your clan's dojo, so the Proboscis Cernos is kinda sorta depending on the clan dojo too. Now, what this bow does is, wherever the arrow lands, it creates tentacles that pulls in nearby enemies before exploding in an AoE a couple seconds later. On the one hand, you can use this as a support weapon to group together enemies, but you can also use it to deal a lot of AoE damage because not only does it have innate viral and a high status chance, perfect combination, but given the fact that it groups together the enemies, you can always mod it for blast or maybe gas to shred everybody who is unfortunate enough to be caught by those tentacles. Now, for the Proboscis Cernos build, I gotta admit mine is a little bit scuffed. I should probably put 1 or 2 more forma into it. However, what we're gonna go for here is a gas build, as I think gas is really great on it. So sure, we go for a lot of gas right here. Malignant Force is a little bit free slot, you could use something else here. I also go for Hammer Shot to increase crit damage. I know the crit chance is basically 0, but I would recommend playing the Proboscis Cernos with some sort of flat external crit bonus like Arcane Avenger, because if you manage to get crit onto this thing, then you're gonna deal some ridiculous damage and it's really cool, my personal recommendation. Also, I mod for base damage because I use Primary Crux in the Arcane slot, giving me even more ammo efficiency, which is great for this bow in particular, and also ludicrous amounts of status chance. Only thing you gotta take care of is that you need to hit the occasional headshot, but it's actually not all that difficult. And if I had a couple more forma in this, I would also use Vigilante Supplies right here for even more ammo economy. It's really good. Up next, we have another powerhouse of a rifle, one very satisfying to play one, might I add, and that would be the Trumna Prime. See, the Trumna has 2 fire modes. In its normal mode, it is a slow-firing fully automatic rifle that shoots out little rockets exploding on impact with a 1.6 meter AoE, dealing pretty decent damage because the stats of this gun are very good. However, the real kicker here is, after taking out a handful of enemies with a normal fire, you will charge the alt fire, which shoots out a huge grenade that bounces multiple times and deals massive AoE damage. This thing is an absolute powerhouse, as you can also see in the background. If you haven't tested it yet, you definitely should because it's a ton of fun to play. For the Trumna Prime, which by the way is a beautiful weapon, like the design team went all in on this. For the Trumna Prime, my favorite build is a heat to damage over time focused one. We of course go for an Elementalist mod in combination with a faction damage mod, or if you don't want to use faction damage, infuse Roar. In the Arcane slot, we combine that with Primary Crux, which not only gives us ammo efficiency, but also, again, ridiculous 300% more status chance. We do like that. And then we, just go for a lot of heat, a lot of fire rate, and also a balance with crit in there. We mod for Serration because we can't go for base damage up here. And I also went for Stabilizer in the Exilus slot. It's not necessary, but the Trumna Prime has quite a bit of kick, and I think that's just a really good convenient solution for that. And last but definitely, oh boy, definitely not least, we have a gun that I only learned to appreciate relatively recently, and I think it's flying under the radar still, and that will be the Stalta. The Stalta is a fully automatic Corpus Assault Rifle with a powerful secondary fire where it charges up a really powerful single shot that explodes in an AoE on impact. Now, the reason why many players, including me for the most time, have underappreciated this weapon is that at first glance, the stats don't look all too impressive. However, it has a secret interaction where, direct hits from both the fully auto and the big alt-fire shot, they are multiplicative with galvanized aptitude. Now, to be completely fair, the Stalta is not the best AoE weapon in the game. Instead, it serves kind of a similar role as the AX-52 that we talked about earlier, in that it is really darn powerful against single strong enemies like demo units in Disruption, Acolytes, and so on and so forth, and that, in my opinion, is the one task that it shines at most. Now, before we jump into the build, if you want to have it for yourself, then the main blueprint can be acquired by defeating the Jackal on Venus, so pretty early on, and the components come from the C rotation of the Granum Void. If you don't like that though, all components are also tradable, so you might as well buy them from other players for platinum. As for the Stalta build, let's also take a look at this. This right here is again a build specifically for single targets like Disruption demo units, for example. This is not meant to mow down hordes and hordes of enemies, and this build in specifically is not built for fire rate, meaning you want to have some external fire rate buff to really get up to speed with it, and also, given the fact that the Stalta is multiplicative with galvanized aptitude, that means ideally you want to use a status primer that inflicts a ton of different status effects on the enemy to really hammer home that damage potential. Of course, there are tons and tons of other ways on how you could build this weapon for specific other occasion. Maybe I'm gonna do a dedicated Stalta guide myself in the future, but if you want to have one right now, then I can highly recommend the video that Moog made on it a while ago. And if you also want to know the best 10 Warframes, then you'll find that list right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demonoid Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Noslandix Gaming, Turtle Pier, Ondakani02, Skylar Bowser, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Shadow Lockhart, Hantares, Patrasader, Trollaloxon, Boomy1, Mr. Games Plays, Zave, Owendai, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.